Hello, everyone. I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsey Wilson University Office of Public Relations, and this is The View from the Hill, the podcast of Lindsey Wilson University. Every week during the academic year, The View from the Hill features conversations with some of the people who help create the dynamic living, learning environment that serves the educational needs of every Lindsey Wilson student every day. In this 25th podcast of the 2025-2026 school year, we will meet Zach Isaacs. He's one of the recent additions to Lindsey Wilson's outstanding communication faculty. Lindsey Wilson University communication professor Zach Isaacs is an example of how people often find their calling in college. For Zach, college led him to become a college professor. He's currently in his first year at Lindsey Wilson, where he's a faculty member in the university's outstanding communication program, which is housed in the College of Business and Communication. Zach's also an assistant coach with the Blue Raiders bowling program. In this episode of A View from the Hill, we'll meet Zach Isaacs and learn what led him to Lindsey Wilson and where he gets some of his research ideas. Zach recently celebrated a big professional milestone by successfully defending his dissertation, which he did at Purdue University's highly respected Brian Lamb School of Communication. But before Zach decided to become a communication professor, he explains that he had several other career goals.
I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and born and raised there. I grew up about an hour from where I went to college, at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I had so many different dreams when I was growing up, to be honest. I think the first thing I can really think of is I wanted to be a horse jockey, actually, which is kind of funny considering I live in Kentucky now, and I'm like 6'7". So my parents told me in like first grade that I couldn't do that because I was already taller than a lot of jockeys at that point. After that, I think I wanted to be a chef or something like that. But then in high school is when I started to kind of really fall in love with politics, history, just social science in general, I would say. So I would say in high school is really when I started to want to become a professor. And I definitely went into my freshman year of college thinking I wanted to be a professor, but actually went in as a political science major in undergrad. I did not go in as a comm major, which I think is interesting because my mom is a communication professional as well, which we've talked a little bit about before. But I didn't really fall in love with communication at all until I took my Communication 101 class, where we had to do a bunch of different activities, a bunch of different projects where, like, for example, we had one where we had to go to a public place and break a bunch of social norms to see how people would respond, right? So I would go to the mall and I would just sit at a random person's table and see what they did, or I would shop too close to people at the mall, or I would, go right up next to somebody at the urinal and see what they would do, So that kind of made me fall in love with the study of physical space, I guess I would say, which I taught nonverbal communication last semester. So I actually did a similar project with my students last semester. And yeah, it just kind of took off from there. And then I realized pretty shortly after that you can actually study political communication. So that sort of just became my calling after that.
There is kind of a connection, though, isn't there, between political science and the study of communication. Of course, communication is such a broad discipline anyway. You think of political communication, but there's other connections as well.
Yes, for sure. And really one thing I think of in terms of politics is that, especially nowadays, pretty much everything is political, right? And everything is communication. So therefore, political communication is one of the most important things to be studying right now. So I think it's a really, really exciting time to be looking at these things. I mean, a scary time too, but an exciting time if you're an academic studying these things.
You must have had some professors as an undergraduate who were role models to you or inspired you to become a college professor.
For sure. I had many, many, many. And that's something I think about even just with even high school, middle school teachers too, to be honest, is how much they inspired me to want to become an educator. But the first person I think of from undergrad at Aquinas College was Dr. Molly Patterson, who was my first advisor I had, and I actually met her before I even started there. It was on like my advising day, over the summer. And I was telling her about how I wanted to go to graduate school then, like before I had even taken my first college class, right? And she could have easily just tried to, temper my expectations and think that, I was just like some meathead thinking I could do too much, right? But she didn't think that at all, and she just immediately kind of took me under her wing. She let me take a 200 or 300 level class that first semester just because she thought I could handle it, and I did. And I did a research project with her after my sophomore year, in between my sophomore and junior years. During that summer, I presented that at a professional conference. So I really have a lot to say thank you to her for sure. So she was like she was my main advisor, I would say, in undergrad, but I also had a couple of really, really good communication faculty who I still keep in touch with, even just up until a few months ago. We still talk, and yeah, I cannot say enough good things about my mentors I had there. Really, they prepared me for grad school extremely well. And even though I came from a small school like Lindsey, it was not a hard transition for me to make because of how much they had kind of poured into me over those 4 years. It was not a difficult transition.
You got your doctorate at Purdue University, which is one of the top communication programs for doctoral students. That must have been a very rewarding, enriching experience as well.
For sure, yeah. And Purdue definitely has a very, very long history in the communication field. They basically created the field of organizational communication, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it was a very challenging experience for sure. And all of the other people in my cohort were also extremely talented. I even followed another person here from Purdue, Miss Caitlin Brooks, who also works here in my department. My office mate, we like to say, we share a wall. So yeah, Purdue was a really good experience, very challenging though. And I had great mentors there as well. Dr. Diana Zulli, who I first met when I was 21 and is still on my dissertation defense committee, which I just defended a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the people at Purdue as well, for sure.
Talk about what your area of specialty is in communication, and how did you decide to focus on that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it's broadly on political communication, but I would say within that, I also kind of focus on interpersonal political communication. So I focus on how do friends and family talk about politics, and how do we communicate about that together. But I don't know, I kind of study a lot of different things too, just because, I have broad interests. So for example, my dissertation was on how we respond to political humor violations. So do we respond to light jokes differently than dark jokes, for example, right? And does it matter if we're a Democrat or a Republican? And if it's coming from a Democrat or a Republican politician, is that going to change things, right? So that was what my dissertation was about. I've also studied protest movements through the media, journalism, mostly print journalism, but also TV, network news, stuff like that. So yeah, I've studied a lot of different things. It's hard for me to really nail it down into just one specific thing that I'm interested in, because it does kind of bounce around a bit. But all of my research topics come from things that I'm interested in myself, right? For example, with my dissertation, I grew up watching Saturday Night Live. I grew up watching a lot of like political satire, right? So that kind of got me thinking, well, what are the ramifications of this, right? So that's kind of where I got that. And then my master's thesis, for example, was on how friends talk to each other about politics. And that was born in how we also talk to our family about politics. And that was born because, well, ever since I was born, I talked to my family a lot about politics. So I got a personal investment in it from there. Talked to all my friends about politics a lot too. So I think that's really where our best research ideas come from, is just from our own personal experience, because we all have such different and deep and broad experiences in the world. So I think that's really where our best research comes from.
What did your research find? What did you discover in terms of how we talk to family members and friends about politics? I imagine that's a source of political education in one way, political debate as well.
Yeah, so broadly, this is about political socialization, basically, is what this is about. And it's one of the most research fields from like the 70s to the 90s in political science and in communication. So it's a pretty broad field, but they mostly look at how parents in the school system kind of encourage you to become more political. And my master's thesis was more on friends and how the friends kind of have an impact, especially on people over 18. So my general idea was that once you turn 18 and kind of get away from your parents a little bit more, start to have, maybe go to college or get like a full-time job, stuff like that, your influences around politics and just in general are going to change, right? So I did find that friends, at least over the age of 18, were more impactful towards people's political leanings than their parents were, which I think is an important thing. And that is something I'm curious about looking more into, but I haven't looked into it more since that master's thesis. So I might pick that up a little bit more. We'll see.
You're listening to the Lindsey Wilson View from the Hill podcast. I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsey Wilson Office of Public Relations. I'm talking to Lindsey Wilson Communication faculty member Zach Isaacs. He's in his first year at Lindsey Wilson. Zach is part of Lindsey Wilson's Purdue pipeline in the university's communication department. Now let's get back to my conversation with Zach. Zach said he was attracted to teach at Lindsey Wilson thanks to word of mouth.
Miss Caitlin Brooks, like I mentioned her earlier, she was saying a bunch of good things about, everybody here. She was like, all the colleagues are great. Like, I haven't met anybody bad, right? And I was like, okay, well, that sounds like a good experience to me. So I applied and, quickly got on campus. And once I got on campus, it was pretty clear to me that it was a good fit for me in terms of just like, I don't know, how I communicate with people. I love everybody I work with. The other communication faculty here are great. Dr. Firkin, Dr. Sexton, Miss Butler. They're all extremely good people. We can talk to each other about anything, which I really like. I think we'll all kind of like advocate for each other. And I understood that within probably the first 5 minutes I was here, to be honest. So the first thing I did was my teaching demonstration, which, had a bunch of people sitting in on, but I didn't really feel super nervous or anything like that for it because I just, I talked to Dr. Firkin right when I first got in, and she made me feel pretty comfortable. So I would say that was really it, was just that it felt easy from the beginning, which, not to say that teaching or being a professor should be easy, but it didn't feel like I had to be someone else or like I had to try to be someone else or I had to, I could just be myself truly, which I think says a lot about a community.
And I imagine, too, the fact that you were an undergraduate at a school like Lindsey Wilson helps in terms of your approach to working with Lindsey Wilson undergraduates.
For sure. Yeah. I went to a small school just like Lindsey in a lot of ways. I lived on campus. I was an athlete. Most of the students here at Lindsey are athletes, and I was an athlete too. So I know how it is to have to, go on bus trips, go in a van for like 5 or 6 hours, 10 hours, maybe even on a weekend, and then have to get up early and go to class on Monday, right? It's not easy, but I know it can be done because I did it. And yeah, if you just work hard and you are willing to put in the time and effort into things that are important to you, I don't think there's really a limit to many things people can do here.
And it's an exciting time, I would imagine, to be a faculty member at Lindsey Wilson with so much happening and the name change from Lindsey Wilson College to Lindsey Wilson University.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, we're even just sitting in one of the exciting things right now, right? We're in the podcast studio, which was just built. There's so many new things going on around campus, new faculty being hired, all kinds of things that are happening. So it's definitely a pretty exciting time to be here.
You mentioned having a mentor when you were an undergraduate. The opportunity to be a mentor to students has to be something that appeals to you as well, even though you're just in your first year as a professor at Lindsey Wilson.
For sure. And that's something that I really don't want to take lightly. And that's a big reason why I wanted to come to a smaller school, is that when I was at Purdue, I might have taught, I was there for 6 years. I might have taught the same student like twice, right? But this semester, I'm teaching maybe, 5 to 10 students that I taught last semester as well.
Well, I think going back to what you talked earlier about being an athlete, it's a little bit like being a coach, isn't it? Because you have an opportunity to watch these students grow and develop just as a coach does. You know their strengths, you know their weaknesses, and you can teach to their strengths and teach to their weaknesses.
For sure. And that's interesting you bring up coaching, because I've been thinking about this for the last few months or so. I try to teach and coach very similarly. I'm an assistant coach of the bowling team here right now, and I really try to coach and teach very similarly. I try to just be completely myself. I try to hold them accountable when it's needed and try to be, hard and tough when it's necessary, but also try to be not their friend, but just like nice and cordial and stuff when possible, right? But it is really fulfilling also to see students in a lot of different aspects. So like, I teach 3 of the bowlers right now, and I taught one of them last semester, and it's really cool to kind of be around them and get to influence them in a lot of different ways. So that's really, really rewarding for me.
That's Lindsey Wilson communication professor Zach Isaacs. To learn more about Lindsey Wilson's communication major, point your internet browser to lindsey.edu and search communication. And that's going to do it for this 25th edition of The View from the Hill for the 2025-2026 school year. You can tell us what you like or what you don't like about this podcast by firing off an email to us at news@lindsey.edu. Be sure to put podcast in the subject line. Also, be sure to encourage your friends, co-workers, family members, associates, and neighbors to subscribe to A View from the Hill. They can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the university's YouTube channel. And View from the Hill is produced by Shelby Burton. She's Lindsey Wilson's Assistant Director of Public Relations and Media Producer. And until our next edition, I'm Dwayne Bonifer in the Lindsey Wilson University Office of Public Relations. Thanks so much for listening. So long, everybody, and have a nice day.